In today's episode, we'll chat about disaster recovery with a historic preservation specialist at FEMA.
And later, you'll meet Peter, who owns the historic Printmakers Inn nestled in the heart of Savannah, Georgia, a city rich in history. But first, I'm Stacy Grinsfelder.
And I'm Daniel Cantor.
You're listening to True Tales from Old Houses. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, hello. How are you?
I'm great. How about you?
Oh, doing fine. We've set a personal challenge to just try not to talk about the weather because, it's what us East Coasters like to do.
It's true.
Yeah. So today, Stacy started the recording with a disclaimer about her hair, which I don't think is necessary, but you can watch it on video now if you'd like to. Do you see how I tied in a plug?
You did. Yeah. We're going to talk about the fact that we have it on video, but the joke was that my hair is basically the Dutch colonial version of hair today with wings on both sides.
Yeah.
And what did you say I should ask for at the salon?
You sit down and you ask for the Dutch gambrel.
The Dutch gambrel. Anyway, before we launch into today's episode, we want to take a moment to thank our Season 12 sponsors, our old friends, The Window Course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog and Sutherland Wells. And this season, we have two brand new sponsors, Repaint Studios and Old House Hub, a new online community from My Old House Fix. Thank you. Thank you so much to you.
Thanks, you guys. And this is a reminder to you, if you, the listener, have not already left a 5-star rating or review for the show, we would love if you would take a few minutes to do that. It helps us and makes us feel really good, and it'll make you feel really good. Now, Stacy, I'm sure you have some announcements for us.
You started us off by talking about the video, so that's where I'm going to start today as well. The video versions this season, the video versions of the interviews from this episode are available on YouTube. And they'll be available usually later in the week. The audio drops on Monday. The videos drop sometime during the week. We've been doing this for the last few episodes, and we'll continue to do it moving forward. And if you've been watching those interviews, we would love to know what you think about that addition to True Tales from Old Houses, because we are just trying to provide all sorts of content for you to watch and listen to and enjoy. The other announcements that I have are, one, again, save the date for the Wood Window Workshop this summer. We're going to do 2 weekends. The dates are July 11th through the 13th and July 18th through the 20th. You can find out more about that at my website, blakehillhouse.com. Early bird tickets go on sale March 1st. And then the Window Preservation Alliance, sticking with the window themes, the Window Preservation Alliance annual conference is March 13th through 15th in Astoria, Oregon. And you do not have to be a WPA member to go. In fact, anyone who has a stake in old windows, you might be a homeowner, architect, window preservation pro, just interested parties, I highly recommend it because the sessions are going to be great. I know there's one on linseed oil paint, lead paint safety. That's a biggie. Also casement windows, which we like to call evil little doors. Those things are so hard to get just right. If you want to find out more about that, including the special rate at the conference hotel, they have a block of rooms. There might still be rooms available. You can find out all of that information at windowpreservationalliance.org.
That's going to be a great event.
All windows all the time from this microphone. Do you have an announcement, Daniel?
I have started discussing a project on Instagram stories if people would like to dive in and see a project kind of from the beginning. But it's the duplex basement. We've talked about it before on the podcast. So if you are a listener of everything, you've heard a little bit about it. But we're finally digging into it on Instagram. I was doing this at the same time as the front porch, and I didn't want to post both projects at the same time because people get too confused. So I banked it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we did talk about the basement on last week's minisode, and we talked about it last fall. So I think it's great that you're doing it on Instagram because we can talk all day, but some people are visual learners and they want to see the pictures and videos. So check out at Daniel Cantor. That's your Instagram handle, right?
That's true. Yes.
All right. That's all the announcements I have. What else is going on with you?
Well, I got the shock of my life like a couple of weeks ago that we haven't discussed yet.
Do tell.
So I was walking down to the duplex to check progress on the basement, and I am walking up and there's like a huge truck in front of the cottage, the Bluestone Cottage, my sweet cottage.
Right. Because they're neighbors, right? Side by side.
They're
Duplex
side by
and the
side.
cottage are side by side. Okay.
Yeah. And then I get a little bit closer and I see that like part of the fence is out. And then I get a little bit closer and I see that there is a massive backhoe in the front yard. And I'm just like, Oh, gosh.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking, where my head is going? Is that where you were?
I had a moment of, they're tearing this house down.
Yeah, that's exactly where I think you're going with this.
It was a fleeting moment because people have recently just moved into it. Like, it would just not make a lot of sense. But I did have that, like, whoa. Turns out, and the reason I'm talking about it in part is because I actually kind of just learned this. And I think other people should know it too, especially if they live in old cities with old infrastructure. So what actually happened was that the sewer line, I guess, I never really got the full story. It was bad.
It's not your story anymore. But
exactly. So, I mean, I'll say for my part, like, I renovated the house. The sewer line never appeared to be a problem. I obviously never lived in the house, so I didn't run as much water as one probably would living in the house, but I never had anything. Everything drained fine. Like, there was never any reason to think there was a problem. So it's not really common to, like, go looking for a problem unless you think there is one. So, of course, like, I replaced every single thing in that house except the sewer line going from the house to the street. Now, in a place like Kingston, usually the houses are very close to the sidewalk. The sewer line will come out the foundation, somewhere near that. And you're not talking about an incredibly long trench, but it is still very expensive. They have to dig up the sidewalk. They have to dig up the road. Like, it's a whole thing.
Right.
This house, as people know, is set 35 feet back from the sidewalk. And then the sewer line is basically in the middle. So we're talking about, like, I think it was almost like 75 feet that they had to trench. So it was really very dramatic looking. All in all, it took a few days. It was just so weird to walk up and see this. And just like, it was like my child was having surgery and no one told me. It was just like, oh,
right.
What? Oh no.
I think it's worth mentioning too, like, you said this might help this might help homeowners. What I was going to say is that sometimes part of your sewer line, depending on where the property line is, can actually be the city or the municipality you belong to, their responsibility for payment and fix. So always pursue that. Is that what you were going to say pretty much? Or
it's actually not. So yes, that is true in other places. At some point, it becomes the city's or municipality's responsibility. Here, you're just responsible for everything from the main. The thing I was going to say, though, is that I recently had my homeowner's insurance requoted, and I was reminded that there's kind of 3 different, like, water damage kinds of coverage. One of them is like flooding, like rain from outside flooding in. One of them is like burst pipe, so flooding within the house because of a burst pipe. And then there's a third one that's like for sewer backup. And so I cannot imagine what this cost if they didn't have insurance for it. But like, I immediately went to double check that I do have this specific type of coverage because it's totally likely that this will go bad in my house at some point too. So like, I think it's a good thing for people to be aware of because that had to cost a fortune.
Thank you. So anyway. Thank you. Yeah. So everyone, go check your policy, see if this is an option for you through your insurance carrier, and consider adding it for sure. These old houses often have old sewer lines from the house to the street. And of course, I'm super glad the cottage is okay.
Me too. Yeah. A little worse for wear, but she'll be fine.
All right. Let's take a short break. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by The Window Course. The Window Course, created by Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog, is a step-by-step, do-it-yourself program that will teach you, the homeowner, everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. It's self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget.
Stacy, I know it's hard to believe, but spring is just right around the corner, so now is the perfect time to get ready to restore the windows at your house. The Window Course has all of the information you need all in one place.
Scott is offering all of his students a special deal. If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or the training package, then you'll also get a free infrared paint remover, and that's a $100 value.
The Window Course is also offered with a money-back guarantee, and Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. So for 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code TrueTales.
True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Sutherland Wells. All of Sutherland Wells products are handcrafted in Providence, Rhode Island with the highest quality, sustainably grown tung oil. Tung oil, which is native to China, has been used for centuries as a durable finish for wood, metal, and stone.
Unlike polyurethane, tung oil finish penetrates the surface of the wood, so it flexes and contracts as conditions change, making it the perfect pre-finish or protectant for everything from fine furniture to window sash and sills.
Now, you used a Sutherland Wells product on your porch floor, correct?
I did. Most recently, I used the exterior polymerized tung oil in medium luster for my brand new Doug Fir porch flooring. After 3 coats, it is absolutely gorgeous and holding up beautifully this winter.
And that's the same one I actually used on my wainscoting in the bathroom upstairs.
Oh, twins!
Yes, but no matter what project you're working on, Sutherland Wells has an entire product line. So if you're working on siding, hardwood floors, furniture restoration, cutting boards, you name it, they've got a product for you.
To learn more about the complete product line, visit Sutherland Wells, that's WELLES, SutherlandWells.com. And to save 10% on your first order, use the coupon code TrueTales.
Welcome back.
And it's good to be back.
Today, we're using the Q&A segment to learn more about how FEMA and the Heritage Emergency National Task Force mobilizes to protect and care for historic properties and artifacts after natural disasters. And let's just get to it because I explained how this topic came to be with our guest, Robert.
Hi, my name is Robert Killian, and I am a historic preservation specialist that works for FEMA.
Hi, Robert.
Hello.
Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, it's been great to be here.
So you and I had a short email conversation, I guess, last fall after the back-to-back hurricanes that sort of ravaged, they ravaged the southeastern states. And you were talking about what you do for FEMA and something called the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. And then, of course, most recently, the wildfires that have just really decimated the Los Angeles area. And it occurred to me that, these are difficult times for so many. And in the Old House community, I'm sure a lot of us wondered what happens to the buildings and sites that hold the collective history of our communities when disasters like these strike. And you have that information. So I am so grateful to you for coming on the show today and kind of shedding some light on how that all plays out. It's a mystery to many of us. So go ahead, I guess, and start by you work for FEMA. Give us a little rundown of what you do.
My primary job is compliance. We have all these federal laws, environmental, historic protection, and executive orders. And our job at the beginning of a disaster is to get the information out of what these are and the resources to make sure you comply with them. And during the disaster, we go out and advise applicants on it. And then towards the end of the disaster, as the projects start coming in, review to see if they are compliant.
So I forgot to specify before I ask you that question. I was going to say, you're in Texas. So you
Yes.
don't have direct relationship with either the back-to-back hurricanes or the fire. I should have specified that.
Yeah.
But things happen in Texas. So when you say they apply for it, if there is a site, and that could be anything like a library, a museum, archives, historical society, anything that is affected by a disaster, they apply to FEMA. Is that how it works?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about it because a lot of people, they hear FEMA and they have one idea. And the reality is we have 10 different regions.
Okay.
And each region has its own states and working with our state partners. So every region, every state, and every disaster is going to be different. And then from that, you have, we call PA, which is public assistance, which is helping state, local, schools, not-for-profits, those. And then there's individual assistance. I think what most people think of when they think of FEMA is individual assistance.
Right.
And then there's other programs too. There's hazard mitigation grant programs and other things that happen before and after disasters to try to not cause, so that the damage isn't as great or preventable. So I actually work in the public assistance side. I've done very little with individual assistance. Just one of the things that happens for individuals is when a disaster strikes for individuals, the individual assistance goes out, they set up DRCs, resource centers, and they go out in the field and they're starting to collect people's information. And I have done the calls where people call in for Helene. I was taking calls as it's called intake because there were so many that they asked for volunteers to help with that. And then there are historic or environmental protection and historic preservation specialists who work with those people But what we call the program people are the ones that go out and they're the ones that run the program on how much money for what and all that. So people go into they can do it online. They can go into the centers. They can do it over the phone. They apply and then they go through the process. Where we come in for individual assistance is the housing mission. If they're going to do mass housing, we have to make sure those sites meet all the rules. Like if they're going to do new construction, bring in trailers, put in utilities, all that. And then we have response division and we have recovery. I work in the recovery division. I've worked on where people are wanting to demolish their house. And what we have to do is if these are going to be demolished because they're too damaged and they're in the floodplain and all the things, then we have to do what's called a consultation, Chapter 106 with the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Agency officer. And so that's one aspect. The other aspect is when they do mitigation, the same thing has to happen. If their house is savable and they want to stay there, and then the local floodplain administrator says, hey, if you want to stay there, because one thing that people don't understand is that FEMA is not a regulatory agency. We're a granting agency. So it's other people's rules that we have to make sure are being applied. And so say the local floodplain rule says it has to be raised 12 feet. Then we have to write that same consultation with the SHPO to say, hey, this house either isn't historic or it's not being harmed or it's being, it is an adverse effect, but this is how we're going to mitigate it.
So I want to I'm sorry, Daniel. I just want to interject something real quick that the SHPO is the State Historic Preservation Office. I just wanted to clarify that for our listeners. Daniel, what was your question?
It might be sloppy, but so when you're out doing this work, are you concerned with properties that have already been deemed and registered historic or?
So the way the NHPA, National Historic Preservation Act, is worded and the way we do it is it eligible to go on the register? That's what we have to determine when we're doing these things. And that's what we have to get the SHPO or the TIPO, which is the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, because we do tribes as well.
Great.
That's what we have to get them to agree with, right? When we do a concurrence letter, we're saying, these are our findings. Do you agree with us? Mm-hmm. And hopefully they do. Sometimes they come back and say, hey, we don't agree and we want you to do this, this, and this, or we do agree, but we want you to do this and this. And I've never seen this happen, but theoretically, if we can't come to an agreement, it would go all the way up to the administrator of the National Historic Preservation Act, which is the American Council of Historic Preservation, and they would make a determination at that. But I've never seen that happen.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a minute about the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. Let's talk kind of like the nuts and bolts here. So let's say there's a national disaster and that something is destroyed that, contains the collective history of the community. How does the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, that big mouthful, you said they call it, what'd you say, HINTF?
HINTF,
yes. What happens?
Let's explain it a little bit. So HINTF is a group, and originally it wasn't under FEMA. It was under the Smithsonian, but then when we started paying for stuff, it kind of moved. But the Smithsonian is a major partner. Lots of other cultural organizations and professionals are members of this. So one of the main reasons I want to talk about this is that most people have never heard of it.
Correct.
And it's not just for museums and historical societies. It's also for individuals whose families' documents or pictures or whatever were damaged. And it also doesn't matter whether you have a federal declaration or not. Most things we do, you have to have a federal declaration. But that website that I provided has resources that anybody can basically call at any time and say, hey, my basement flooded, my pictures were damaged. What can I do to save them?
Ah, okay. I'll put that link in the show notes. You provided it to us, behind the scenes, but I'll make sure to drop that in the show notes.
And there's handouts there too to tell you what to do, what you can do to try to save them. Freeze stuff, rinse the mud off. There's all kinds of things depending on what we're talking about. And then there's a list of resources there as well. So let's talk about what happens when there's a disaster. So there's two parts of HINTF. There's what we're just talking about now, which is called Save Your Family Treasures. And so we have different specialties in this role. So like I'm Secretary of Interior Qualified Historian. There's also architects and historical architects, archaeologists, and collections care specialists. So I'm also a collections care specialist. So they have collections care specialists that have gone through the training that go out to these DRCs and they set up with the information and also stuff that they can show people how to do it So when people are coming to the DRCs to fill out their request for assistance, these people are there and they can say, and if they have stuff that's damaged, they can actually see a demonstration of how to rinse their documents or whatever it is.
I got to ask you what the DRC is because the government loves their acronyms.
I'll be honest, I haven't worked that side. So it's the resource center. That's where they go in. So they set up a main resource center in the disaster area. And then often there's satellites too to try to reach people.
Okay, go ahead.
And also people often going door to door in the disaster area. Again, that's the closest I've been to that aspect was I was on a public assistance mission in Oklahoma, and there was a tornado that took out downtown Sulphur.
Yeah.
And really destroyed the community. And I was there within hours of it happening. And so I got to see some of the public assistance stuff going on and got to see how fast the response is. It's heartbreaking to see, but it's also amazing to see how many resources come together all at once to help each other. It's pretty amazing. So anyway, Save Your Family Treasures is one aspect. And I think probably underutilized and not known enough, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
And then the other aspect is where I work is the public assistance side, and that's working with, you think museums and historical societies, but it could really be any place. I've had churches that have murals on the wall and artwork and historic artifacts. And, it could be a school or a library or an archive. It really could be, it's a wide range. Any place that has cultural artifacts could come into this. Right now, I'm working with the Roswell Museum. They were flooded during an event and their entire collection was underwater. And so what you do then is on that side is, again, it's the same thing. It's a list of resources. You get the list of resources out and you find the state resources too. What colleges have cultural heritage programs where they have conservators or the state archives or whoever is available. You try to get everybody involved and just try to lead them. And there is a key difference between our normal public assistance grant program and the HINTEF is that if you're, let's just go with the city, and City Hall is destroyed and all the contents are in it, it's destroyed. We write it up as destroyed. It's found out what that stuff is worth, and you can't get paid out more than the damage. So if your insurance pays for 50% of it, the grant program can only be up to 50%, but usually there's a cost share between the state and the applicant as well. So it varies for every disaster. But if it's destroyed, you get reimbursed for that to make you whole, right? If a cultural object's destroyed, it's irreplaceable. So you get nothing for it from the federal government if you don't have insurance. But what the HINTEF can do is pay to provide for the professionals to come in to assess whatever it is and stabilize it where it's at. Maybe that's all that can ever be done is save it where it's at and it becomes part of its history and that's all you can do. Or it could be to do a restoration on it. But as in everything else with federal dollars that's only to pre-disaster conditions. So it's only going to pay for what was damaged. If the painting was halfway underwater, and this, again, I'm not on the money side of this, right? There's some formula that they figure out how much they'll pay towards that restoration because they're only restoring half
right.
Half the thing, yeah. It gets very complicated.
Sure. Yeah, definitely splitting hairs there, but I get where you're going with that. And I understand. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere. Yeah.
That's all part of the process. And I have worked with museums, historical societies on Hurricane Harvey in Wisconsin, Iowa, New Mexico.
Wow. Gosh, I had no idea, absolutely zero idea how this all worked. Daniel, do you have any questions?
Yeah. If folks are listening and they're in areas where they might have a higher likelihood of encountering a disaster such as this, are there kind of top level things that they can do to be better prepared in the case of a disaster?
So actually, if you go to FEMA's website, and I can look later and send it to you, or you guys can look, there's a resource page for preparing everybody. They recommend everybody be prepared, that you have a go bag, that you have a plan. And if you're talking about your precious objects in your house, I mean, I can give some basic stuff. One is don't ever store them in the basement and preferably not in the attic, which is what everybody does, including cultural institutions, right? If you're in a historic house, where do you store stuff? In the basement and in the attic. Worst two places, right? Because you don't want it to be underneath the flood level and you don't want the roof to get ripped off or a leak in the roof.
Sure.
So if you're making plans and you're preparing, the easiest thing to do right away is to say, let's keep these things on the floor or at a level that is likely to not get flooded. But of course, things happen. I mean, the Roswell Museum never thought the entire complex would be completely underwater, but it was.
Sure.
And then also you can think about, if you're making your plan, you have water, you have, where are your keys, where are you going to go? What are you going to do with your animals? It could be the same thing for your treasures. Obviously, human safety and your animal safety are top priority, but that's part of your identity. And that's one of the things that I think some people don't understand. Oh, it's a disaster area. And why are you worried about this? Well, if you've lost everything, your house is gone, it's destroyed. Finding those family pictures and documents and being able to save them instead of them being destroyed, it's part of who you are and your identity. And it may be the only thing you have left. And so they become extremely important. And again, I don't work at individual assistance, and I don't know if my heart could take working individual assistance all the time. But in Sulphur, I actually was there doing something public assistance and ran into somebody who was sifting through her commercial building looking for her family stuff that was in there. And it was heartbreaking. It really was. So things become more important than people realize when you're in that situation. Certainly you fixate on things and things become extremely important. So doing anything you can to figure out in advance how you're going to protect those things, grab them and take them with you, put them in the safest place and hope, and then come back for them, whatever is important.
Yeah. Wow.
Great. So I think when these disasters take place, obviously they tend to get a lot of news coverage. We're used to seeing FEMA come out and do their thing. As sort of the average person sitting on my sofa feeling useless, are there things regular people can do during these events that can help?
One of the things is people think FEMA comes out and it's FEMA's disaster and FEMA's doing everything. And that's not the way it works at all. Again, we're a granting agency and we help prepare things, but it's the state's disaster. The state has to request help. There's a whole formula to find out whether it can be declared, then FEMA recommends it to the president signs off on it, becomes a disaster. But most things are taken care of at the local level and with not-for-profits that follow the disasters. There are groups that follow the disasters and feed people. FEMA doesn't do that, but they're part of the plan for what does happen after the disaster. And so people, yes, there are all kinds of ways. What you don't want to do is just rush into the area if you're not already there during what I call unless you have expertise. I don't want to dissuade anybody that has the expertise, but you don't want to be one of the people they have to save, right? But after that, or if you're in the area, you're helping people. I mean, people have to do it, right? But there's all kinds of stuff. I've seen people come in they have heavy equipment and they come in and they get in with the local emergency manager and they get part of the process and they help remove the debris from the streets. Or one of the things that you may have seen if you've ever seen a tornado or anything in your area is all of a sudden there's all these electrical utility company trucks from different states. They literally follow the disasters, and Sulphur was flat, and as far as the electrical wires go, power was back up within 24 hours. There were 800 crews or something.
Wow.
Wow.
So there are lots of things, but the key is to reach out to the appropriate people and let them know what you're capable of and how you can best help. Whether it's get in contact with not-for-profits, church groups come in, feed people, house people, the rescue groups, whatever, but make sure you contact somebody in the area. Don't just go in completely on your own. And every area has its own emergency managers and the police department, the fire department, and everything.
Sure. I am encouraged to hear that the responses are so quick and that there are organizations that follow these disasters. And I'm also very sad that there are enough disasters that there are organizations that follow them. Yeah. But I want to say thank you to you, Robert, for shedding some light on this, for explaining the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, especially. I'm going to put a lot of links in the show notes for people who might be interested in finding out more about this. But I just want to say thank you. Over and over again, thank you, because I have learned so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Robert. Well, that was great. I knew nothing about this, so I'm very grateful to Robert for going slow with us.
It's a timely topic, so I'm glad we had a chance to address it on the show. Just a reminder that we are looking for questions this season for Q&A, so you may leave a voicemail by hitting the mic icon on the True Tales from Old Houses website, or you can submit your question through the contact form in the same place. And we're also open to follow-up on past episodes. Both Robert from this episode and Josie from 2 episodes ago came to us because they had expertise and useful information related to current events or past topics. So please let us know if you can provide some information like that, because we would absolutely love to hear from you.
Always.
All right, Daniel, we got to take another quick break. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by Repaint Studios. Okay, confession time, Daniel. In the past, how did you store your paint tray when you were mid-project?
You're not going to like this, but I would use those cheap plastic liners and then I would store them in the trash.
No judgment from me. I used a trash bag and that was a sticky, icky mess. But now I use the repaint tray.
Okay, me too, but let's spread the word.
Billy, who invented the repaint tray, knew that this was a problem for so many. So she created the solution, and now her woman-owned business is disrupting the painting industry. The repaint tray solves that mid-project paint storage problem. It has a reusable silicone liner, an airtight lid, and it keeps your paint fresh for weeks.
Weeks, you guys, like weeks and weeks.
It's like Tupperware, but for your paint tray.
And the tray itself, I'd like to note, is a very heavy-duty metal, so it doesn't slide around, wobble, or bend when you're using it. Plus, when you're done painting, you can just let the paint dry in the silicone liner, and then you get to peel it off, which is exactly as satisfying as it sounds.
The tray, silicone liner, and lid, they're all built to last. So that's better for you and for the planet. It is the last paint tray you'll ever need.
Snag one for yourself at repaintstudios.com.
And for 10% off your order, use the coupon code TrueTales10. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Old House Hub, brought to you by My Old House Fix. I have a question for you, Daniel. Have you ever spent hours scrolling Facebook groups, Reddit threads, obscure websites, random YouTube videos, trying to find answers about your old house project?
Stacy, I'm an old homeowner. Of course I've done that. Not to mention, those like deep dives where you come out 3 hours later and you know everything about Victorian paint colors, but you still have zero idea how to fix your house.
And that's why we're so excited to tell everyone about Old House Hub from My Old House Fix.
It's like a headquarters for all things old house. It's an exclusive online community where you can gather resources, browse archives by topic, connect with fellow enthusiasts, and get expert advice. It's also a place where you can share your passions without getting lost in endless social media feeds.
And there's no creepy AI algorithm suggesting totally unrelated content. It's just good, meaningful conversations with people who get it. So no more scrolling, no more headaches, just connection and answers.
It's beautiful. It's like old school internet for old house lovers. And the best part is right now, True Tales from Old Houses listeners can get a 1-year membership to Old House Hub for free with the coupon code TrueTales.
That great deal is only available during this season of the podcast. When season 12 ends, the deal ends.
So don't wait. Visit oldhousehub.com to join the Old House Hub community for free and finally get a go-to place for your old house questions, projects, and inspiration.
Our next guest today is Peter Galloway.
Peter may not have dreamt of becoming an innkeeper, but his love of historic preservation led him there anyway, and that is just the beginning.
Hi, I'm Pete Galloway and the owners of the Printmakers Inn in Savannah, Georgia, and we also have a little preservation consulting business, just Peter Galloway Historic Preservation.
Hi, Peter.
Hello and welcome.
So good to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's go back a little bit because I want to talk about really how did you become innkeeper? So let's talk about the first property and then we'll get into kind of the story that blew my mind and the reason why I was like, tap, tap, tap on my computer. I must talk to this man from Printmakers Inn.
Yeah. What is going on here? I never thought I'd be an innkeeper, right? That wasn't like, oh, someday I want to run a B&B or inn or whatever, it was mainly just because I hated my job previously. And I almost studied architecture in college. So I was super into building arts, and my uncle had a B&B type inn set up in Savannah already. So I had kind of seen how he did it, and I was like, this is easy. I can just buy a historic house and throw some antiques in there and put it on Airbnb or make your website or whatever.
I love this confidence. So how's that worked out for you?
So good.
Honestly, seems fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's good because I'm my own boss, which I love. And it's got us into historic houses. So basically, I always wanted to own an old house. And we were in Florida at the time. And the job I had was with Johnson & Johnson. I was doing medical device sales. So I was in hospitals all day long. And it was rewarding, but it was just like, I was sick of working with some, pretty mean doctors. This house was for sale, this Victorian house in Savannah. And I was like, it was perfect setups. It was a multi-family building. It had 4 units. It was like, there were long-term renters in it, but it was kind of the same setup to what my uncle has, where they're apartments. So it was nice. They all had kitchens. They were all self-sustaining. They all had their own entrance and exit, which we liked, because we've stayed at B&Bs where you're kind of with everybody, and I don't like that. Some people do. So it's kind of like a mix between an Airbnb and a B&B, right? You're there to help people as much as they want, but we're not serving breakfast here. So it's kind of I don't have to get up at 6:30 in the morning and have breakfast with strangers I don't necessarily want to talk to. And some people do, some people don't. So we liked the setup, and the owners were what we couldn't get a loan because our jobs were in Florida at the time, my wife and I. So the owners are like desperate, and it was just kind of right time, right place. They were like, well, we'll do seller financing. So it's like, okay, awesome. So
nice.
That was the only way we could afford it to do it. So we did it and started it. And my wife and I lived in the original Printmakers Inn building for like a year and a half. While we kind of renovated the other 3 apartments, we lived in the owner's suite, so it was a little nicer. And then we eventually moved out of that, and now we're back in the Hills house, living on properties, which has been great. So we just moved in like last month to the Hills house. So that's kind of the long story short.
So you moved specifically to become innkeepers.
Yeah, I mean, because it was like, this is a great way to learn how to run your own business. It's small scale. You have, not immediately, but you'll gain equity in the property just for long term, which is nice. So kind of either way, if the inn business doesn't work out necessarily, you still can gain some capital by turning it into a small business, and then the buildings just appreciate, which they have here astronomically in 10 years. Across the street was a used car lot, and now there's 12 townhouses. So it's crazy how much our block's changed in Savannah in general. It's kind of like what Charleston was 15 years ago, which is crazy, because when we looked at Charleston, it was so much more expensive even in 2015. Now it's stupid expensive. But Savannah's kind of progressing that way. So it was like, this is, a great way, because we were super into old houses. So like, how can we have an old house? How can we have our own business? And it was just like it was just kind of the perfect way to do both, and then get into preservation. So, which is what I kind of always wanted to do. And now we're doing that more. So I think it was a good move.
All right. Well, I want to pivot to this part of the story that intrigued me about Printmakers Inn. And as soon as I heard it, I was just like, I have to know more about this. And that is that when you bought the property, there was one house on it, but you have moved a second house onto the property. And I want to hear that story, because it's not just a short move. It was a major move. So please elaborate.
Yeah, it was 950 miles. Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
So we had the vacant lot, and like we kind of talked about earlier, we wanted to move a house. And so ideally I was trying to find something local, right? So like Georgian house or South Carolina, North Carolina, somewhere that fits kind of more the vernacular here in the Southeast. And there was a couple that were really intriguing. There was a great looking federal era house in Georgia that needed to be moved. There was one in North Carolina that needed to be moved. That was about 1800. And that would have been perfect. Both would have been perfect options. But the Preservation North Carolina and the one in North Carolina were like, you have to move it inside Tarboro County. Couldn't leave the county, which we get. I mean, you obviously want to keep it in place, but that didn't pan out. The one in Georgia didn't pan out. So this went up to Virginia to meet my uncle's friend who moved a house. So he moved a house from Virginia to Fisher's Island, Connecticut. So he did the opposite move. He has a really cool 18th century plantation with It's actually his family's house, which is really cool. And they had another like outbuilding that was a little cottage that he moved up to Connecticut. That's a post and beam, so timber frame building. And so we went up there and met him, and there was actually some houses in Southside Virginia. So kind of just over the North Carolina border, not far from Raleigh. And there were two amazing houses we looked at. And one of them was in pretty bad shape. It had awesome, just crazy Southside Virginia federal mantles that were like just unbelievable. And the owner was just a farmer who didn't want the house, didn't want to restore it. And we couldn't get a hold of him. He wouldn't respond back to us. So we're like, well, great. So now what do we do? So we literally I started Googling stuff, which is crazy. And I just talked about that in this WTOC local news thing, which sounds stupid. I mean, it's like you Google house to move for free. That's what I was doing.
That's what I would do.
Yeah. I mean, Google knows everything. And so I found a bunch of people up in the Northeast that actually advertise themselves as, timber framers. We have dismantled barns. We have dismantled buildings. Call us. So I've reached out to probably a handful of them. There was a guy in New Jersey who's great, who I still follow on Instagram. I think his handle's like Resto Tech New Jersey. He's a super nice guy. Some of those didn't really pan out because they were smaller buildings, or one was too big or not as intact, because we wanted to find something that was totally intact, that had not been altered. Because there's so much stuff in Savannah, particularly, which is really disappointing, we have a lot of 18th century stuff, but it's been altered so much it looks like you can't really tell, or they've ripped out original plaster, they've ripped out original mantles, they've made it open concept. It's just not the same. There's one of my favorite houses, they have faux marbleized mantles and faux graining on the doors in the parlor, and they just painted it all white.
Ugh.
And then they sold it for $3 million because it was perfectly restored. Yeah. So we were like, no, we're purists. We want something totally untouched. And then, so I found this guy in Connecticut, but he was like, I know of 3 or 4 houses that are great candidates. They need to be moved for commercial development. So it's like, okay, awesome. And this was way back in 2016, 2017. So it was like a year and a half, 2 years after we bought the original Printmakers Victorian building. And so we were like, okay, well, I had hounded him for 6 months, and he finally called me back. I think he was like, okay, he's serious. I'll actually talk to Pete. And so his name's William Gould in Pomfret, Connecticut. And he's the guru of carpentry, timber framing. He's probably 75-ish now. But I mean, he knows everything. He's worked on countless 18th century buildings. So I was like, this is the guy. If I can get a house from him, he knows what he's doing, which is part of the problem. And I'm sure a lot of people that you talk to, it's just restoration, preservation, whatever. It's finding the right people. It's number one difficult thing.
Oh, yeah. It's an ongoing struggle.
Yeah, it's hard. And because there's not many people who are, trained in certain trades like traditional plastering, traditional masonry, traditional carpentry. They do carpentry or masonry, but it's they'll slap up Portland cement on a 18th or 19th century building and then it's ruined. So he enlightened me and taught me a lot. And so he was like, well, why don't you come up with your wife and see some of these houses? So we're like, okay. So we flew up there with our 1-year-old at the time. And this was right before 2017. And we saw the Hills house, which is what I'm sitting in today. And we saw this house in Bellingham, Massachusetts, which was a great 1790s to 1800 house. It still had its original wood gutters on the building, which was pretty wild. I've never seen that before. And had just fantastic woodwork in that house. And then this other house fell through. So we just saw those 2. And then flew back to Savannah, and we're like, okay, and my wife's like, do you really think we should do this? Is this the best idea? And I'm like, well, if a bank will loan us money to do it, why don't we try it?
So this man that you were with kind of stepped in as a consultant, and you looked at the houses with him, and he gave you ideas this is a good one, this is not a good one, this would be fine. All right. So then you had to secure a loan, and I guess you did that. Did it take several banks? Several tries?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Several tries. There was I think we actually only talked to 3 banks. I tried to get an SBAC loan for the whole thing, which would have been fantastic, because it was a fixed 30-year loan at 3.5% at the time.
Oh, yeah.
But that would have been awesome. I'm really disappointed that didn't work out. It was interesting. We went through all these hurdles, had to go through the Georgia DNR because they were basically in charge of it was just one government agency they needed to go with.
This is Department of Natural Resources. The DNR is the Department of Natural Resources. Okay.
Correct. Yes. And so since it's a government loan, they had to go through all their agencies, and they wrote this letter back to us, like this ridiculous letter saying we had to do an archaeological dig on the site, which I'm totally okay with that. That would have been cool.
I was just going to ask you if you had to do that, because I know that that's a DNR thing. Like whenever you're disrupting the area, that an archaeological dig is like the first thing they ask for.
We did it in Connecticut. So we did a little of it here, but we ended up not going with the SBA loan because their main criteria, or they basically said no because we were falsifying history by moving the house.
Oh, interesting.
So the archaeological dig was a hurdle, but it wasn't like the end of the world. And I was fine with that. But they were saying the building in Connecticut was a nationally registered candidate building that was being taken down. And they were creating a false sense of history by moving it here. And they disregarded my whole letter and presentation to them was like, the building is being torn down in Connecticut. They're like, regardless, it is moving.
Yeah.
Well, as we all know, history did stop in 2014 or whatever. No more new history.
Yeah, totally. And it was like this crazy, I was like, do I even do a rebuttal with these people? Because it was like, I wrote like a 5-page presentation to this woman at the DNR, and it was just like, I get that it's not from the Savannah. It's, it's going to be moved. It's, a lot of stuff happens during a moving process, but honestly, the building looks the exact same as it was in East Hartford. So I think the false sense of history and losing its context, you guys hear context, was what set them off. And so we ended up having to do a full commercial loan because we couldn't get an SBA loan. So they did a partial SBA commercial loan to get, if people really want to hear this, I'll continue. But it's just, we had to get commercial terms. So it sucked. It was a variable loan. It was a 10-year balloon note. So after 10 years, we have to refinance it. So the terms are way worse, but we could do it. So we're like, you know what? Screw it. Let's just do it. They're going to give us money to do it. I think it's going to be a good play in the long run. Kristen, my wife, is way more cautious, so we had to kind of have a long conversation about that. But.
Yeah. So you have secured the funding, which is incredible news. And then you have to work on the logistics of moving this house from, you said, East Hartford, Connecticut, down to Savannah. And this is what I can't wrap my head around. So I'd like you to explain the logistics of moving a house that far.
Yeah, for sure. And then also we had to get it approved by the city. So that took another year.
That was my big question.
Yeah.
The middle there of, we can do it. Are we going to be allowed to do it? Because Savannah is quite protective of their history.
Yeah, Stacy, sorry, I'll throw that in there too really quick.
I just want to know.
Yeah. Actually, I think that's better. I think we should talk about Daniel's question first, and then we'll get to the logistics, because who cares if you can, if you're not allowed? That's another story.
Well, that was the 2-part hurdle, right? The financing and then the city approval. So the city viewed it as new construction. They did not view it again as an old building because it's a false sense of history. We're going to go back to that a million times. And so I had to prove that there was existing buildings in our neighborhood that were transitional. So colonial looking, but not Victorian. So can I put a colonial looking building, Georgian looking building in the Victorian district? And so I ran around and took photos of very transitional buildings in our neighborhood, more like Greek Revival, kind of wood-sided buildings that had 6/6 windows and, pretty plain facades. And so I just showed those to them and I was like, this is crazy, but okay. So I worked with them. They were actually pretty good. I wasn't asking for anything crazy. We weren't asking for any easements. The lot density, our building takes up way less density than a lot of the buildings in Savannah. I think, I can't remember the code, but it's 70% of the lots can be building. We were 35% of the lot.
And was this lot did it at one time have a home on it?
Yeah, so we think the Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps had a building on it 1910. Our street was amazing Victorians all along the north side of the street, and there was 5 Victorians just like ours. They all were torn down. So we were the original Printmakers is the only one left on the block. The 1910-ish house that was where the Hills house now was torn down, I think, in the same time period, like 50s, 60s, 70s. So there was a building. We don't know what it looks like. I don't have any photos. I have a lot of photos of the Victorian house, which makes sense because it was grander, more interesting. I think this was like a one-story kind of, maybe craftsman-y type of house is my guess. So yeah, so it did have a house, but since nobody knew what it looked like, they didn't say like it had to look like that. That was a hurdle. And at least the MPC, which is our Metropolitan Planning Commission, they were actually super helpful. And I think they were appreciative. I wasn't trying to like swindle them. I was super honest with them about the whole process. I was like, I'm not going to ruin the building if y'all are going to make me do something crazy. That was the most important thing. And then we had to talk to the building department to make sure they would allow us to do what we wanted to do. And the building department, it actually worked out. The building department was like, no, they viewed it as a restoration.
Interesting.
So it like made no sense, but I was like, okay, at least the building inspector was really cool. And he's like, whatever's existing, you can keep. I'm not going to make you alter them. Yeah.
That is fantastic.
The stars aligned. We were like really crossing our fingers on all this stuff. And it was just like, God, one hurdle. Okay, good. One hurdle. Okay, good. But you see so much development in Savannah now and it's just garbage and it's getting approved. So I'm like, well, they should have approved what we did because we're trying to do something good.
I think it pretty clearly enriches your streetscape, and it's such a beautiful, beautiful house.
Yeah, we think so, at least, too.
Okay, so now to the big event. We've moved the house. How do we move a house?
All right. So Connecticut says, take this house. Savannah says, you can bring it here. And then there's a whole lot. What did you say? 946 miles in between where it was and where it needed to be. How in the world?
Yeah. So what's really cool is the older the house is, it's heavier timber frame, right? So like anything probably pre-1800, especially up in the Northeast, and you'd say down here as well, is all hand hewn, huge timbers. It's all mortise and tenon together. It's pegged. So there's no nail fasteners. It's not like the Victorian house, which is like a balloon frame house where you have more, not modern, but somewhat modern technology, nails, screws, all that. So, and it's very simple. It's like a medieval English timber frame building, and Elizabethan. There's a lot of similarities between the two of them. So it's easier to take apart, and you label everything. Luckily, Bill has done this before, and the guy that we worked with as well, Steve Beelitz, he owns Glastonbury Restoration. He owned the building. So we bought it from Steve, and Bill was kind of like our middleman, consultant, helper, because we needed all the help we could get. We never moved a house before.
Right. How many square feet is this house?
So it's a box. So it's 40 by 30. So it's 1,200 square feet on each floor. So roughly 3,600 square feet. And then we did an addition off the back. So the whole building's probably just like maybe 4,200 square feet total, the whole footprint. And so Steve basically was like, he's so passionate about everything. He's amazing. He's obsessed with everything 18th century Connecticut, New England. So between him and Bill, they taught me so much even more about 18th century architecture, what elements to look for. And it was kind of like the building had been altered so much on the exterior. So it was probably circa 1900, maybe late Victorian, but it was just like very simple, wood siding. They changed the window sash to 6/6. Originally it was 12/12. And then 1690s was probably casement windows. So it had evolved quite a bit. But you walked into the interior and it was like a total museum. From the outside, you're like, oh, well, it's an old building, but I can't really tell. So it was really cool. It was a lot of like figuring out different elements about the building and how old it actually really was. And
so you had to take it apart. So you took the building apart and then...
I went on a tangent there. Yeah. So so documentation's huge. You cannot take enough photos. I think I have 30,000 photos, which are amazingly helpful when you're reassembling. But so we labeled everything. The interior comes out first, obviously, because when you take the roof off, you don't want to have the interior in there. If it rains or snows, we started in January, so it was really cold. So we took out all the raised panel walls. We took out all the flooring. We took the lath and plaster out. We saved a lot of plaster, so we had ideas on how it was finished. So when we did it down here, we could finish it the same way. We saved a ton of the original split ribbon lath from the 18th century that we would hopefully reuse, which we actually reused quite a bit of it. And then so we get to the framing. So all the interiors out, the floors, doors, everything. So now you're looking at basically the timber frame and then the siding around it, right? So that's what you're basically looking at before you start taking it fully apart. And then you label the timber frame. So like we're in the parlor. So the parlor was the C room. So you had like CJ1 was, C joist 1. You had the summer beam above me was, C1. And then the chimney group behind me was C2. So like you just all throughout the house. Then we were taking photos again as in videos as we did all this. And Steve has a guy who dismantles buildings. So he's done this. He does this for a living.
This blows my mind because I don't even like to put IKEA furniture together. So I can't imagine how many parts to this.
Okay, I feel very stupid. Like I should definitely know this. But when I'm picturing moving a house, I thought usually they would almost like cut it up into quarters and put it back together. Like, so when yours moved though, was it like flat packed essentially by the end?
Yeah. I mean, we had three tractor trailers. So I bought two like used shabby 50-foot containers that looked really scary. I'm amazed they actually made it here. That was really stupid in hindsight, but they made it here. And then there was a flatbed for the timber frame. So,
wow.
Yeah. And then the interior went in the other two.
That's just so crazy. Yeah.
I'm positive you've answered this question 1,000 times, but I'm going to ask anyway. Like cost wise, does this make any sense when put up against just build a new house, leaving aside the historic value of the original house?
It depends where you are, I would say.
Okay.
If I'm in, let's just say rural Midwest, right? And let's say a house is $300,000 to buy. Let's just throw that out there. Then no, it's probably not. But if you live in a place like Savannah, Charleston, a place where real estate is stupid expensive, it actually kind of makes sense because you're gaining like, I'll give you an example for the townhouse. I don't know if people like talking about money, but I'm not going to go into too much detail, but across the street, there's a townhouse for sale for like $900,000. And I watched them put them up. They're crap. I mean, they look nice from the outside. It's just like CMU block, stucco. And, just you hear a million nail guns going off. The stud frame goes up like that. It's sheetrock. It's got open concepts. It's fine. Okay.
Right.
It looks fine, but it's $900,000. So, we spent more than that. I'll tell you that. But we have a house that's 330 years old. It's totally original. Literally nothing was thrown out. It's got everything it had in East Hartford, plus has a modern foundation, new plumbing, new electrical. So it's like,
right.
And we paid more than that, but not substantially more than
that. Yeah.
So significantly more value. I understand.
Right. And when we're talking about an emotional component or a historical component, then you do not have to convince us that this was the right idea because we are absolutely on board. I'm sure most of our listeners would be like, heck yeah, good for you. All right. So you have, at this point, I'm just going to, I guess, I'm going to recap a little bit about what you've talked about so far. So you've dismantled this entire house. You have put it on 3 flatbed trucks. And then do you need special clearance to get it from Connecticut to Georgia? Because I know in some house moving, I guess you're in a regular sized vehicle, but sometimes it's wide. So you need to like move power lines and blah, blah, blah. But none of that occurred, I guess, in this case.
That's the reason you have to dismantle anything that's going more than a couple miles, because utility lines, like you said, you've got to take utility lines, you have to take bridges into effect. So like you can move a whole structure a couple miles usually, but that's why you have to dismantle it. So it goes in a standard trailer. So it just drives down the road normally. So, which is nice. That's the one good thing about it. That's one of the good things about it. So yeah, so we took it when we got it basically down, we had to do some repairs to the timber frame, to some of the mortise and tenon joinery fell apart. So we did some of that. That took actually like 3-4 months to do that. And then get the building down here. It's March of 2020. And
perfect time.
Yeah, perfect timing. So we started the foundation in January to get the foundation up. Bill and his team comes down from Connecticut to help us put up the frame, which was ideal because they've done it before. And I didn't have to rely on a crew down here, which would have been a nightmare. So we basically started getting the timber frame up, which is great. We got it pretty much all the way up, and then COVID starts, right? Like people are freaking out. Bill and half his team go back to Connecticut. we didn't have the third floor attic roof system up. So I'm like, I convinced two of them to stay. We got the timber frame all the way up. We got the roof on, which again is all the original framing from 1690s. And then 1745 is the later part. So the roof and the second floor are basically 1745. So we got all that up, and then I convinced them to stay a little bit longer with me and kind of help do some carpentry stuff. And we had a mason here who did the chimneys. So the chimneys, all the original chimney brick. And then we kind of limped along during COVID for a year to try and kind of find people that we could help do the restoration right. And I found an English plasterer who was local, who was amazing. So we did, lime plaster everywhere the way they did it, had the house originally. And he had a carpenter that he was friends with in Baltimore that came down to help us do some of the fine carpentry. Yeah, so then it took us 2.5 years to reassemble it and finish it, basically.
Wow, that is fantastic.
That seems shockingly fast, honestly.
Yeah.
It's a big house and
yeah.
Oh my God. So I guess one thing that really struck me about seeing some of the before, like the photos from before the house was moved and stuff is like, this is not recognizable to the house that you now have. So it's like just...
How so? Explain.
The facade.
At least the photo I saw, the facade is like down
Yes.
to its sheathing and like there's kind of nothing. You can see the shape of the house is, a nice colonial center hall, but like beyond that, it's sort of nothing. And then now it's, spectacular. So how did you, I guess, go about like figuring out what form all of that new detail would take? And like, did you work with an architect? How do you do this?
A little bit. So
you know too much. It's weird.
It's just a lot of research. So that's why I tell people, like, I love research and I love reading about 18th century architecture forms, design, antiques. That's a whole other discussion. We could talk about hours about antiques. But Bill, who was also, and Steve, they were kind of obviously helping me as well. But we knew the facade had changed a lot. So 1900, I mentioned that earlier, it was totally changed. So it was not in its Georgian appearance or earlier. So we used examples in like Glastonbury, which is the town just south where Steve's from. We used just around the Connecticut River Valley. There's still some exterior facades intact. So we knew what they looked like. They had 12 over 12 windows for the most part. They had a nice, entablature above the window. They either had a Connecticut River Valley doorway or some feature like that. They had, dental molding on the cornice, usually under the eave. So we knew like guidelines, and we had all these 18th century pattern books. So we used Palladio and Batty Langley as kind of inspiration and picked window entablatures. The city made us do a portico and a raised stoop because that's what's in Savannah. So that's not what the building had originally.
What would it have had?
It probably would have had just a Connecticut River Valley doorway, because it was
interesting.
It was on a flagstone foundation, a foot off the ground. And now the building's 6 feet off the ground to mimic more of Savannah. So that's those are the only two real changes that make it. But Newport, Rhode Island has a lot of raised stoops and similar. So New England in 18th century. So yeah, so we used 18th century pattern books and used the proportions to get everything right. That's the main thing that's so important is the proportions. So if you mess up that, it looks stupid.
Sure.
So
yeah.
If you can use literally, it's scaled in Batty Langley's 1740s. I think it's the Builder's Jewel or Country Builder. I can't remember which title, but he has it all scaled. So the building size, you scale it to that. And then it's basically you come up with your drawings and you make your moldings off those 1-to-1 ratios. And Bill is a great carpenter, so you could trust him to do that. And we basically worked back and forth for a year on drawings and proportions and scale and what we thought looked right, what we didn't think looked right to make it what it is today. So that's what I love. So we're designing this island for the kitchen, and we used an 18th century piece of furniture I have to make the island look like a piece of case furniture, which I'm hopefully almost done with it. So I'll post about it soon.
Yeah.
So I love that stuff. So that was what was fun. And that's how the front looks the way it does, but it looks very, very, very similar to a 1740s house in Glastonbury. That's original. We don't know what it looked like, but it very well could have looked like that on the exterior.
It's a truly striking house. People should definitely go look at it.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
So neat. All right. Well, this has been so great, Pete. It's always hard to end these interviews because sometimes I feel like, oh, we're just getting into a brand new, really cool topic, and I just want to keep talking about it. But I do want to say thank you so much for being here and telling us more about the Printmakers Inn. If people want to either book your inn or find out more about you and your process and such, where can they go?
Yeah, so website, which is just printmakersinn.com. That's the best way to book stuff with us. And then Printmakers Inn at Printmakers Inn on Instagram is great. We do a ton of stuff on it. That's pretty much primarily what we do stuff on. And that has our little preservation consulting stuff. We're talking about that as well on there. So to try and help people do the right type of preservation work, but also just what we're doing at the inn and then stuff about the inn. Instagram's the best, I would say.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks again, Pete.
Thank you so much, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Even after all those technical issues with that interview, it was a great conversation with Peter. And one of my favorite parts was where he talked about moving the house like a piece of flat pack furniture.
It blew my mind.
Yeah. We've had 2 or 3 house moving stories on this podcast before. And always we talked about raising the house on steel girders and putting it on a truck and moving it. And so the idea of just sort of disassembling and moving it flat, I can't get over it.
And like being able to keep track of every single thing and where it's supposed to go and actually do it.
Right.
Like it blew my mind. I told Brad about it later and he was like, but no, they like kind of cut it up into sections. I'm like, no, not this one. They totally took it apart. It was great. I mean,
do you think they had like a leftover box at the end with just like, I don't know where this goes, right? Just like IKEA.
You just keep it. Just in case.
Maybe we'll need it later.
Yeah.
All right. That's it for us today. So thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses. And thank you to our guests, Robert Killian and Peter Galloway. This show would not be possible without the generous support of the Window Course, Sutherland Wells, Repaint Studios, and Old House Hub by My Old House Fix.
To continue the conversation, check out the video version of the show on YouTube and visit us on Facebook and Instagram at True Tales from Old Houses. You can follow myself at Daniel Cantor and Stacy at Blake Hill House.
In next week's mini-sode, we'll follow up on our current projects, tangents, and whatever rabbit hole we inevitably fall down, hopefully related to old houses. Until next time.
See you on Monday.